If you're a guy hoping to get married, I got bad news for you. A growing number of women don't feel the same way. And as a single guy who wants a relationship, this has me just as worried as you are. So the question becomes, why are women abandoning a system that has historically benefited them? Some say it's feminism. Others blame dating apps, the Manosphere, or even young people in general, saying things like Gen Z hates commitment. But people who think this way are missing the big picture. These factors are not only connected, they're actually part of the same machine. And it's a machine that keeps young people broke, isolated, and distracted from the true underlying reason your dating life sucks. So today, we're gonna expose that machine and find out what's keeping you from obtaining the huzz. Let's start with the most obvious question. What role does feminism have to play in the modern dating crisis? People have made millions blaming feminism entirely for the decline of marriage. And the crazy part is, they're not entirely wrong. Most women these days have jobs, but they still expect their boyfriend or husband to earn more money than they do. And because of women's rapid advancements in education, having a rich husband just isn't realistic for every woman anymore. And yes, I do think the feminist message of don't settle for anything less than perfect can be toxic sometimes. And it leads to many women having unrealistic expectations for men. But I want you to take a step back and think about it from the perspective of a woman. And think about the ways men have failed to catch up in order to be desirable to the women who still have more reasonable standards. The fact of the matter is, not every man can provide value solely with his financial contributions anymore. So that means some of us have to learn to contribute to a relationship in other ways than just financially. If you don't understand what I mean, let's take a step back and compare what is expected of a woman in a relationship these days to what's expected of a man. If you're a woman, you probably have to earn at least some amount of money because everything is so fucking expensive these days. But you also have to do most, if not all, of the housework. So that means, on top of having essentially 2 full-time jobs, if you're a woman, you also have to be an unofficial therapist for your boyfriend who probably doesn't even know how to express his own emotions. But if you're a man, you only have to have a job and occasionally intimidate or fend off someone who's trying to threaten your girl. And while she does all the housework, you get to sit around and yell at her to make you dinner or fetch you a beer. The truth is, women carry a much larger burden in most relationships with men these days. So many of them have decided that the juice just isn't worth the squeeze anymore. Meanwhile, us men are falling behind because we don't know how to adapt to a world where we can't just dump all of our unprocessed emotions on our girlfriends. And let's be honest, a lot of us are even too lazy to even help out with the dishes sometimes. Expectations for women have only gone up since the inception of feminism, but expectations for men haven't changed at all. And it's mostly because men can't bring themselves to accept that the world is different than it was 20 years ago. But for some reason, all men can do these days is sit on their phones and complain about feminism and not having their laundry done, while women have to carry an emotional burden that's at least as heavy and smelly as that pile of dirty laundry in your room over there. And hey, I'm guilty of this too, y'all. We're guys. We're not always gonna be perfect, but we can at least try to put in more effort. And we can at least try to learn how to process our emotions with someone other than our girlfriends. So, to reiterate, the only reason feminism is a factor at all in the decline of marriage these days is due to men being unable to adapt to changing standards women have had as a result of no longer being forced to marry a man in order to financially survive. You may be wondering though, where do men go when they can't accept this change? They start to see men with sunglasses and Bugattis online telling them that they actually aren't the problem.
Women are not logical creatures like us.
It's the immigrants, the feminists, the blue-haired liberals. Ew, gross. And they tell these men that if they keep working on themselves, they will be entitled to control women as much as they want. Yay! They then swallow the red pill and wash it down with Kool-Aid that probably tastes like Andrew Tate's piss. And turn themselves into deplorable people that no woman would ever want to be within a mile of, much less date. If your entire worldview is predicated on the idea that women don't deserve rights, and your search history is comprised almost entirely of things that would be blocked on school Wi-Fi, you're gonna struggle to attract an earthworm, much less a high-quality woman. But you might say, Max, I'm not one of these incel losers. I'm just a normal dude. I don't abuse women. That's fucked up. So why can't I get a date? Well, there's one very obvious psychological reason the red pill has hijacked dating. The loudest voices on the internet are usually the ones that win, not the majority. So if the loudest male voices on the internet are saying that the 19th Amendment should be repealed and they're advocating for ethnic cleansing, it automatically makes women more distrustful of all men, including you. Think about it this way. Would you rather have your smoke alarm go off when there wasn't actually a fire? Or would you rather have your smoke alarm not go off when there is a fire and your house burns down? You'd obviously pick the false alarm. And it's the same thing with human psychology. Our brains are wired to perceive potential threats as actual threats, regardless of if they actually turn out to be dangerous or not. So if we apply this to dating, for a man, the worst thing that can happen when he shoots his shot is that he gets rejected or laughed at, or he might get posted on social media and clowned on. But if you're a woman in that same situation, that man might stalk you and kill you, or worse, rape you. To sum it up, red pill men have unfortunately put women on high alert. So that's caused women to be more distrustful of men in public spaces, regardless of whether those men are actually dangerous or not. But us men, we're not stupid. We see this happening. So many of us, myself included, have just opted not to approach women on the street at all for fear of being labeled a creep. Because even though we're not in physical danger, the emotional pain of rejection is very real, and many of us have just grown tired of feeling it. But now we're all isolated and distrustful of each other, so no one wins. Except, remember that machine I mentioned in the intro? What if this isolation is exactly what the machine wanted? Because people are most vulnerable to propaganda when they feel isolated or divided, especially with how the internet can make everyone feel disconnected. Social media these days creates echo chambers that lock us into a meaningless culture war while the real enemy just sits back and eats popcorn. The most sinister thing is, this propaganda often keeps us from noticing the subtle signs of our financial outlook getting worse. It starts off small. Maybe the price of eggs goes up by 50 cents. Your rent increases a little bit. Your credit card charges 1% more interest than it used to. But if you zoom out, suddenly you realize that you're paying twice as much for basic necessities as you were just 5 years ago. And not only has the government done absolutely fuck all to help your financial situation, your income simply has not increased enough to compensate for this increased cost of living. This is why families can't live off of just one income anymore. Why women feel so pressured into starting a career earlier, which in turn destabilizes men and makes them feel like they'll never be enough. And when that happens, they turn into raging, misogynistic losers that women would never want to date. So the cycle just gets worse and worse and worse. Because here's the cold, harsh truth. While you've been arguing online about whether men should be allowed to sleep with other men. Wealthy corporations have taken over the government through lobbying and special interest groups and made living in America a financial nightmare for everyone except the ultra rich. Don't believe me? Here's a statistic that will blow your mind. There are more empty houses in the US right now than there are homeless people. Shocking, I know. But the reason that this is happening is because all of those houses were bought up by private corporations who would rather let people who actually need shelter freeze under a bridge in a blizzard than let people rent these places out for cheap, prioritizing profit over human need. But you might say, why don't those homeless people just get a job, pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, start contributing to society instead of being so lazy all the time? Well, dear viewer, if we didn't treat them like actual garbage and kick them out of public spaces as if they're just disposable litter on the side of the road and not actual human beings, they might think that they're worth something more than the trash that they sleep around. Mental health matters. These people need help. And how do you expect someone to get a job if they don't have a stable place to take a shower and maintain good hygiene, or the money to buy quality clothes for a job interview? It's just not feasible for these people to get back on their feet without some kind of external assistance. I'm sorry to say this, but if you think this way, you just fell for one of the oldest tricks in the book that the machine uses. Because all of a sudden, capitalist propaganda has made you think of poor people and homeless people as subhuman, lazy bums instead of people with inherent dignity and worth. In reality, these people are simply victims of a system that discards them the second they are no longer viewed as useful. And this is the root of the issue. Capitalism treats people as tools that can be discarded when they are perceived to not have value anymore, reducing human beings with inherent dignity and worth to cogs in a profit-making machine designed to help poor Elon Musk buy his 7th yacht. Oh no. How terrible. Because at the heart of capitalism, there's a contradiction. The workers and the bosses do not want the same thing. In fact, they want the opposite. Imagine that you are an electrician interviewing for a job and your boss gives you two options as to what your salary is. Ignoring all other factors, would you rather be paid $50,000 or $55,000? You'd obviously pick the $55,000, wouldn't you? I know I would, but why would you do that? Because you want to be compensated fairly for the labor that you provide. But the boss would want the opposite. The boss would rather pay you the $50,000 because that's the least amount of money in this situation that he could get away with. So if the worker wants to be paid as much as possible, but the boss wants to pay the workers as little as possible, under capitalism, who do you think is going to get what they want? It's the boss. Because under capitalism, there is an incentive to maximize profit over human need. So in the system of American capitalism, without any sort of outside regulations that say you have to pay the electricians in your company the $55,000, your boss can get away with paying you less so he gets richer at your expense. So now you can see why the federal minimum wage hasn't gone up since 2009, and why everything feels so goddamn expensive now. The fundamental contradiction built into capitalism is that since the bosses end up with so much money and influence, they can directly influence the government into passing laws that allow them to exploit their workers by not paying them a fair amount. So once you realize that the machine keeping people on the streets is driven by corporate incentive to maximize profit over human need, you can also start to see why this same machine would want to keep people divided isolated, and constantly at each other's throats. The truth is, these billionaires behind the capitalist machine want us divided to keep us from collectively realizing the uncomfortable truth. The only minority that has ever made your life worse are the billionaires. All they've ever wanted is more profit at your expense. Hell, even all the popular dating sites are owned by the same company. So these greedy, ultra-rich billionaires have figured out how to profit off of the dating crisis directly. All the while, these billionaires have been profiting off of your own loneliness through this machine, late-stage capitalism. What is late-stage capitalism, you may ask? Well, it's a term coined by none other than Karl Marx. What he's basically trying to say is that eventually, the wealth gap between the bottom 99% of people and the top 1% of people would get so wide that it would become basically unlivable for the bottom 99%. And considering we might get a trillionaire this year, I gotta give it to the guy. He was onto something. Regardless, it's clear that when we let billionaires run unchecked through Reagan-esque economic policy, it's gonna end up in the vast majority of people's lives sucking ass. So yeah, while it may not feel like it, the real reason your dating life sucks is because of the consequences of capitalism. And unfortunately, women have beaten us men in subconsciously realizing this. They've decided that the cost of being a wife, a mother, raising a family is too much because not only does it cost an exorbitant amount of money, it costs an infinitely larger amount of the one resource that money can't buy, your time. I'm gonna quote Casey Musgraves here. Say what you think. Love who you love. Because you only get so many trips around the sun. Yeah, you only live once. Sorry guys, I can't sing. It's not my fault. And many women have chosen to follow their arrow and leave that system behind in exchange for more freedom with what to do with their lives. However, I don't just want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom. Mr. Women just don't want to date anymore. Mr. The human race is gonna fail and I'm just gonna sit back and let it happen. No, I actually want to give you some practical advice on how to improve your dating life. First of all, we live in an age of widespread isolation and division. So one way you can really tick off those corporate overlords is to go outside, put yourself out there in real life, and spend time in your community. This can mean many things to many different people. You could volunteer at your local food bank or community garden. You could join a dance or yoga class, join a running club, or even just say hi to your neighbor walking their dog instead of awkwardly walking past them or going to the other side of the street. Because the best way for us regular guys to dispel all of the negative stereotypes that loser incels have created online is by actually going outside and talking to real women. Because the truth is, while we may want to immediately start advocating for radical systemic change, that can't happen without community support. And we can't have community support when everyone is so isolated in their internet echo chambers. But I also want to address men specifically, to give you some advice on how to approach relationships differently in an ever-changing world, so that we aren't falling behind anymore. Listen closely, fellas. Just being a financial provider is not enough anymore. You have to contribute in other ways. Offer to help out around the house, like do the dishes or the laundry sometimes, vacuum. You have to actually learn how to process your emotions with someone other than your girlfriend so that she doesn't get burnt out by being your only source of emotional vulnerability. And I know that sounds really hard. Trust me, I understand. As a fellow man, it can be really hard to open up to people, to trust people, especially our male friends. But we have to try. We have to be more vulnerable with our male friends so that we can create more fulfilling lives for ourselves that don't mean we have to rely on having a relationship to feel happy and fulfilled. And as an added bonus, it means we no longer have to drive our girlfriends up the wall, across the ceiling, and down the other wall. And like I said, I know it can be tough to open up when you're told that emotion is weakness. I understand. But if you want a healthy, fulfilling relationship the way I do, you have to try. We have to try. Then, and only then, can we start to plug the holes that we created in the sinking ship of the human race. So once us men start making those necessary lifestyle changes, women will start to see us as desirable again when we go out and talk to them in real life. Because the truth is, women have said the quietest part out loud already. Bell Hooks wrote a book called The Will to Change, where she revealed that all women desire male love. Deep down, they do want us. But before we can receive their love, we first need to learn how to love, absent from patriarchal and capitalist control mechanisms. And that means we have to learn to embrace community and interpersonal connection over isolation and individualistic thinking. You don't have to do it alone, because we can only overthrow our corporate overlords together. We can only get out of this dating crisis together. And we can only create a better world if we're together. And my hope is that in that world, starting a family won't be so goddamn expensive anymore. So now you know about the consequences of late-stage capitalism in dating. But you probably want to know how the machine of late-stage capitalism actively goes about doing their propaganda, sprinkling it everywhere. One example of this is hijacking religious values to control the bodily autonomy of women through things like pro-life rhetoric and purity culture. So I decided to make a video about the psychology of purity culture. So if you're interested in that, it's going to be the first link down in the description, or it'll be on the end screen. So I hope you'll support my work by checking it out. As always, I hope y'all have a fantastic day. Peace!